Hey everyone, so today we're going to go over the ear, and this is really straightforward. The good news is you don't have to know anything except some basic models and diagrams. We're going to go over the parts and pieces. I'm just going to work my way from the outside to the inner ear and name all the parts and pieces, and we should be good. Don't forget to check out Dr. West's video where she's holding models. I didn't get a chance to get any models, so I'm just going to use a diagram. But with the combination of both videos, you should do just fine. The ear is actually pretty easy. So if we look at the ear, let's go to our diagram, and you can see that with the ear, your list will show that there are three parts to the ear. We have the outer ear, then we're going to have the middle ear, and then we'll have the inner ear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the anatomy of hearing first, and then we'll talk about balance. So to start with, we have our outer ear. Now, really, the outer ear only consists of two things. We have our auricle, which is the part of the ear that you see. It's the ear flap. It's called the auricle. You can also call it the pinna if you'd want. P-I-N-N-A, pinna. But that is the outside flap of your ear. All right? So this is your auricle. Now what it does is it traps sound. So that's why when you cup your ears, you get more acute hearing because you're making your auricle bigger. So some animals have a big auricle. Like deer have huge auricles that stick up above their head and they can turn them, and that's to listen for prey. But we have an auricle. It's going to capture sound and it's going to put it into our ear canal. Now the ear canal is called the external auditory meatus. You learned that but way back when we were learning bones back in January. So this is the external auditory meatus. So the sound waves are going to come in. They're going to be directed by your auricle into your external auditory meatus. That's your external ear or outer ear. That's all you have to know. Now, the waves of sound are going to come in through the external auditory meatus, and they're going to hit a membrane right here called the tympanic membrane. You probably know it as the eardrum. Don't call it eardrum on the test, but this tympanic membrane is like the head of a drum. So the sound waves are going to come in, they're going to hit that tympanic membrane, and that tympanic membrane is going to vibrate. All right? So just imagine these sound waves coming in. You have your tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane is going to vibrate with each sound wave that hits it. You see, a sound wave, it's a wave of energy. So the reason why you can hear me is because there are sound waves coming out of your computer and they are hitting your tympanic membrane. They are waves of energy. So these waves of energy are hitting your tympanic membrane, and your tympanic membrane is going to be vibrating like this. It's just going to sit and vibrate. Now what the tympanic membrane does is it transfers those sound waves from your outer ear to your middle ear. All right, so let's look at the middle ear. This region here is your middle ear. It's really only made up of four things. It's made up of three bones, and then you've got a tube called the auditory or eustachian tube that is coming up to your middle ear. So first of all, let's go over the bones. So the tympanic membrane is going to transfer that sound vibration through a series of 3 bones. The first bone right up against the tympanic membrane, this right here, is called the malleus. Then we have kind of a middle bone called the incus. And then we have a third bone that is kind of stirrup shaped that is called the stapes. So you have the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. What they are going to do is they are going to transmit that sound vibration. So you've got that tympanic membrane vibrating, and up against it's the malleus. Well, the tympanic membrane hits the malleus starts vibrating, the malleus hits the incus starts vibrating, the incus hits the stapes, and the stapes vibrates. So really all we're doing is we're moving the sound wave through the middle ear. So these bones are going to be vibrating and transferring that mechanical sound wave through the middle ear. All right. In fact, if these bones are vibrating when there's no sound wave, sometimes they can vibrate on their own, then that's when you get a ringing in your ears. We call it tinnitus. And so if these bones are malfunctioning and they are vibrating when there's no sound waves coming in, that's abnormal, and that's a disorder called tinnitus. You've probably heard of that. Okay, so the final thing in the middle ear is this eustachian tube. And the eustachian tube runs from the middle ear down to your nasopharynx. In fact, when we went over the nasopharynx, we mentioned this opening of the eustachian or auditory tube. This tube is going to do a couple of things. First of all, it is designed to equalize pressure. You've got space in this middle ear, and this space has air in it. Well, it's going to be really uncomfortable if the air inside your middle ear doesn't match the air in the world around you. So what happens is you can pop your ears. So when you pop your ears, you kind of yawn and you open up this eustachian tube, which allows air to move in and out of your middle ear. So for example, let's say we are down here in Grand Junction. Down here in Grand Junction, we have higher pressure in the atmosphere. So out here in the atmosphere, we have high pressure. So we need that same pressure in our middle ear. So when you pop your ears, you're going to equalize the pressure from outside to inside. But let's say you start off in Grand Junction where there's high pressure, and you drive up to the top of the Grand Mesa. If you drive up to the top of the Grand Mesa, that's almost 11,000 feet. So we're going from 4,600 feet to about 11,000 feet, 10.5. And it has much lower pressure at the top of the mesa. Well, when you're driving, your ears will have a huge change in pressure. So by the time you get up or halfway up the Grand Mesa, you've got a bunch of high pressure air in your ear, but you have low pressure air outside of your ear. Now, air moves from high pressure to low pressure. So if you have high pressure in your ear, you're going to start feeling uncomfortable. That's when you pop your ears. So when you pop your ears, your eustachian tubes open, and the air is going to rush from high pressure out the auditory tube and then out to the atmosphere to low pressure. So you are going to equalize the pressure by moving air from high pressure to low pressure. Now, the opposite's going to happen when you come back down. So you're at the top of the mesa, a day of skiing, and then you drive back down to town. You're going to have low pressure in your ear. You're going to have high pressure out in the atmosphere. And so you're going to pop your ears again and allow air to rush in through the eustachian tube to your middle ear. So this is why we have to pop our ears. So these are the items of our middle ear. Now the other thing that the eustachian tube does is it helps drain any fluid. So if we get fluid in that middle ear, the eustachian tube is going to help drain that fluid into your throat and you can get rid of it. This is going to help us with infections. Now what happens is if we have an infection in the ear, you've got a bacterial infection in this middle ear. Often we call a ear infection, we say it's an inner ear infection. It can be an inner ear infection, but most of the time your ear infections are middle ear infections. You have an infection within this middle ear. And kids get it a lot. And a lot of times children get chronic ear infections, middle ear infections, because they can't drain stuff adequately out of this eustachian tube. The eustachian tube is either kind of flat and doesn't allow things to drain, or it might be plugged or just collapsed. So what they do is they put tubes in kids' ears, right? Well, the tubes don't go into the eustachian tube. What they do is they put tubes through the tympanic membrane so that the middle ear can drain out the external auditory meatus. This is a temporary thing. It lasts about 18 months. And so what the doctors are hoping is that in about 18 months, these temporary tubes in the tympanic membrane will allow things to drain out, and then the kid will grow a little bit and open up their eustachian tube so that they start functioning properly. The bad thing about this is the more we compromise our tympanic membrane, the more likely there is to get a hole in it. Usually what happens is over that course of that 18 months, the artificial tube gets pushed out as this tympanic membrane heals. And then you'll still have a complete tympanic membrane that's got no hole or anything in it after that tube has been pushed out. However, if they have to put a second pair of tubes in or something happens, this tympanic membrane may end up with a hole in it. And that's kind of like having a hole in the head of a drum. It doesn't beat as good, right? So there will be some hearing loss with that. Okay, so now we're ready to move into our inner ear. So we have taken the sound, we've vibrated the tympanic membrane, which has vibrated the malleus, vibrated the incus, vibrated the stapes. Now the stapes is up against a structure called the oval window that is making up the beginning of this inner ear. Now the inner ear, it's kind of looks like a snail. It's got a snail shell, and then it's got kind of this body part, and then these arches. So these are all making up the inner ear. So what we're going to do, kind of in a nutshell here, is we're going to transfer that sound vibration into the inner ear, and then the inner ear's job is for balance and hearing, and that sound vibration is going to be picked up and turned into an action potential that is then going to be sent to the brain. Now if we look at this diagram, we'll notice that the inner ear is kind of broken into two parts. We have this part that has these arches, and then we have the snail shell. All right, we're going to go back and talk about these arches later because they're for balance. But let's talk about hearing with this coiled structure. Now the coiled structure is called the cochlea. So if you look at the entire inner ear, these arches are called semicircular canals. Then the base here, see this base is called the vestibule. So the stapes is up against the vestibule, and then the vestibule turns into this coiled seashell called the cochlea. So what's going to happen is the stapes is going to thump up against the vestibule, and the vestibule is going to carry those sound waves into the cochlea, and the cochlea is then going to turn that sound vibration into an action potential that can go out of this vestibulocochlear nerve and into your brain. All right, so let's see exactly how this happens. I've got to get my picture of my inner ear, and we can then kind of look at it. So as I mentioned, this is not a bad picture. So as I mentioned, the stapes is going to be, this is the entire inner ear, okay? Now, notice that you've got this kind of oval thing. This is where the stapes is up against. So the stapes is up against this membrane that's oval called the oval window. So you've got this oval window. Now, the stapes is going to thump up against the oval window, and the oval window is going to vibrate. All right? So you've got the stapes thumping up against this. The stapes is here. You've got the oval window here. The stapes is going to be thumping up against that oval window, and the oval window is going to vibrate. And what happens is the sound vibrations are then going to move into that vestibule towards the cochlear duct. All right, so the stapes vibrates, thumps up against the oval window, and then the sound is transmitted through the vestibule into the cochlea. Now, the cochlea itself is made up of 3 chambers. So this is like a zoomed in picture of the cochlea, and it's a bologna slice. So what we've done is we've cut that cochlea into in half, right? So you've got this round cochlea, and we've cut it in half like this, and that's what we're looking at with this picture. So if you look at this, the cochlea is made up of 3 chambers. We have these big chambers that are on either side. They are called the scala. So we have a scala vestibuli, and we have a scala tympani. These are fluid-filled tubes. The cochlea is a coiled up set of tubes. Then the one that's really important is this middle one. The middle one is called the cochlear duct, or I think your list calls it the scala media. Honestly, I learned the hard way in our last exam that I've got to grade everything by hand. So I will make sure that if you put cochlear duct or scala media, they're both correct. 100% correct. Also, with the other 2, they're kind of hard to tell apart. The scala tympani and the scala vestibuli, if you get them mixed up, I won't count those incorrect. So if you put scala tympani for the scala vestibuli, I'm going to give you credit for that. So don't worry about that either. But you should know that they are the scala. So put one or the other when you see these on the exam. The one that we really care about is the cochlear duct. I'm going to call it the cochlear duct because that's what I was always taught what it was. I'm not going to say scala media, but you can put either one and that's fine. Now, the cochlear duct, this middle tube, contains the magic organ here that actually converts the sound waves, those mechanical vibrating waves, into an action potential. And that is a structure called the organ of Corti. Now, the organ of Corti is lying within this cochlear duct. So the organ of Corti is going to be in the cochlear duct, and it's going to be wrapped up in this tube. Okay? Think of the organ of Corti. Think of it as a coiled set of piano keys. So when that sound vibration comes in, the sound vibration is a pitch. So actually everything that we hear is a pitch that would fit on the musical scale. So you can think of the organ of Corti as a coiled up set of piano keys. So if the sound vibration coming in is, let's say, a C major, if it's a note in C or a note in F, that pitch is going to come into the organ of Corti, and it's going to hit the organ of Corti in a specific place, kind of like playing the key on a piano. And then that pitch that's picked up by the organ of Corti is then going to be turned into an action potential that's then going to be sent to the brain. Now, we're going to learn the crux of this in chapter 17 when we get into the ear. However, you just need to realize that the ear is going to pick up different pitches. So everything that we hear is a pitch. And you can actually test this. The next time you're vacuuming or mowing your lawn, you can actually start humming the pitch of the motor of your vacuum cleaner or the engine of your lawnmower. You can, and as you mow, you can hum the pitch of your lawnmower, and that is actually the pitch coming in to your organ of Corti. So think of this organ of Corti as a series of piano keys, and so we're going to be vibrating the organ of Corti at a specific spot. Now let's look at this organ of Corti a little bit closer. This is the organ of Corti. All right, so see, here's this cochlear duct. This organ of Corti is right here. And the organ of Corti consists of a membrane. We call it the tectoral membrane. It's not on your list, but I'm kind of giving you extra information here. This tectoral membrane is what vibrates. So that sound vibration, let's say it's an F sharp or whatever, is coming in. It's hitting the organ of Corti, and it's going to vibrate this tectoral membrane. So this tectoral membrane is going to vibrate up and down, back and forth. The organ of Corti contains these cells. They're called stereocilial cells because they have little cilia that stick up. So what's going to happen is we've got this membrane that's going to vibrate, and that vibration, so you've got this membrane, the tectoral membrane, and then you've got these stereocilial cells that are below it. And so when that pitch comes in that is sensitive to that area of the organ of Corti, it's going to vibrate and hit that stereocilial cells. The stereocilial cells are going to pick up that vibration, and it's in those stereocilial cells that we convert that vibration, the mechanical vibration, actually into a nerve impulse. It turns into an action potential that can go to the brain. So this vibrating tectoral membrane hits these stereocilial cells with the cilia sticking up, and then it's within these cells that we convert that pitch or that sound wave into an action potential. And see, look, they show a nerve coming out of these stereocilial cells, and that action potential will then zoom to your brain where you will interpret what you are hearing. All right. So this also explains, if we go back to the organ of Corti here, when we are sensitive to various sounds, remember, it's different areas of the organ of Corti. So as we get older, we tend to lose high-pitched sounds. And so like high-pitch sounds can be heard by younger people often, and older people can't hear them. That's because that section of the organ of Corti that picks up those really high notes becomes less sensitive and it's not working anymore for older people. So we can lose range of hearing as the organ of Corti stops functioning in certain areas. All right. So there was this app a couple years ago that, I don't know, it was called the Teenage app or something, where you could take your phone and you could produce a really high pitch and see if people could hear it. Older people may not be able to hear that high pitch, but younger people are like, the pitch is killing me. That all has to do with the organ of Corti. All right. Now, also, if we look at this setup here with the inner ear, the oval window is where the stapes is up against, and it's going to vibrate and send that signal to our cochlea. We also have a round window right below it. So this is the round window, and it kind of acts as an equalizer. So it, as we push into the oval window, the round window pushes out, and that helps equalize some pressure. Okay, so that really takes care of hearing. So with hearing, we have the cochlea in the inner ear picking up the sound vibrations. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go back to our picture here, and I'm just going to go through hearing one more time. So I'm going to go through all the organs of hearing, and then we'll wrap this video up talking about balance a little bit. So, okay, so here we are. Let's get my highlighter on. So we've got a sound wave. Let's say I'm screaming, right? Ah! I'm screaming, and the sound vibrations are coming in. They're hitting your auricle. Your auricle is going to direct that sound wave into your external auditory meatus. The sound waves are going to come through the external auditory meatus. They're going to hit the tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane is going to vibrate. The tympanic membrane vibrating hits the malleus vibrates, hits the incus vibrates, hits the stapes vibrates. The stapes then thumps up against the oval window, and the oval window vibrates, and that sound vibration goes into the vestibule, this middle part of our inner ear, and then into the cochlea. Now, in the cochlea, the sound vibrations are going to go into our cochlear duct, and it's going to affect the organ of Corti. So this organ of Corti is then going to vibrate its tectoral membrane, which is going to thump up against these stereocilial cells. The stereocilial cells are going to pick up that vibration and turn that vibration into an action potential that's going to go up that vestibulocochlear nerve to your brain, where you're going to interpret what you are hearing. So if you look at this, sorry, I have to go back and forth through these pictures, but if you look, see, this is our vestibulocochlear nerve. And if you notice, right here is the actual vestibulocochlear nerve, and then it branches. You've got a branch going down to the cochlea. So this is called the cochlear branch of the vestibulocochlear nerve. So this branch here is going to be the cochlear branch because it goes to the cochlea, and then it fuses with the other nerve that goes to our semicircular canals, I'll mention here in a minute, and then we have our vestibulocochlear nerve. So that is how we're producing sound. The crazy thing about this is everything that we've learned, it's all mechanical. Things are just vibrating all the way to the organ of Corti. So it's the organ of Corti that actually turns this all into an action potential or a nerve impulse that can go to your brain. So you can see why people can slowly over time lose their hearing. If these things aren't vibrating, let's say the ossicles, the bones aren't vibrating properly, or you have a damaged tympanic membrane, all of this mechanical moving can wear out over time, and this is why older folks end up having a harder time hearing. Also, we can have the organ of Corti not functioning as well as we want it to, and so we can slowly, gradually lose hearing. You know, another really common thing that causes us to lose the ability to hear is the fact that earwax, we call it cerumen, can get built up in the ear canal. So our external auditory meatus can get a bunch of cerumen in there, and then if you take like a Q-tip and you try and clean your ears out, you can actually end up packing the earwax up against the tympanic membrane, and that's going to affect hearing. And so if you have impaction of that cerumen up against the tympanic membrane, it's not going to vibrate very well, and you're going to have hearing loss. A lot of folks go into the doctor or go into an ear specialist thinking that they're losing their hearing, and all they need is their ears really cleaned out well, get all that cerumen out of there, and then that tympanic membrane can vibrate and allow for better hearing. So, you know, those kind of things can happen. Okay, so that's hearing. Let's get into balance. Now, I mentioned that the inner ear is going to have these semicircular canals. And the semicircular canals are going to be for balance. So these are balance structures as well as part of this vestibule. So the semicircular canals are going to be full of fluid also. Let's see, where's my good picture of them? Okay, so if you look at these semicircular canals, they are kind of wrapped in an osseous layer, a bony layer. We call it the bony labyrinth. But there's a tube inside, and this tube inside, this hollow tube, is full of fluid. We call it perilymph. I don't think that's on your list. If I miss anything, I apologize. I'm actually doing this all from memory, so I don't even have the list in front of me. Perilymph is sometimes on the list, sometimes it's not on the list. Sometimes they mention the bony labyrinth and the membranous labyrinth, but I don't believe they're on the list anymore. But the outer coating of the entire vestibule here is wrapped in the bony labyrinth. Inside is a membrane called the membranous labyrinth, and it holds a fluid. Now, what's going to happen is if you look, you've got three semicircular canals. You've got one that kind of goes in one plane, one that goes in a second plane, and then one that goes in a third plane. So it's kind of like an XYZ coordinate system. So as you move your head around, the fluid is going to slosh around these semicircular canals. And these semicircular canals contain little stereocilial cells, sort of like what's in the, very similar to what's in the cochlea and the organ of Corti. But as this fluid moves past those cilial cells, the cilial cells pick it up, and then they can send an action potential to your brain telling you the position of your head based on this fluid movement. So this fluid movement is going to be picked up and sent to the brain. So that's why we have it as an X, Y, Z coordinate system, because any way you move your head, the fluid's going to slosh around and be picked up by these cilial cells. Now, the base of each semicircular canal has a swelling. See this swelling? There's a swelling right here, there's a swelling right here, and there's one right here. That is just a generic name called an ampulla. Ampulla means swelling. And when you go into A&P2, you'll see that several organs have an ampulla. It's just a swelling of a tube. So the ear semicircular canals has this swelling that's called an ampulla. So these ampulla are the swellings. The vestibule is this entire structure that's kind of the base of the entire inner ear. And the vestibule contains a structure or a set of structures that are also going to be dealing with balance. They're called the utricle and the saccule. So if you look, this is kind of hard to see on this picture, and actually I think there's only one model in the lab room that shows these, but we have two lumps. See, we have a lump in the vestibule right here, and then we have another lump right here. The top lump is called the utricle. So see, there's a lump right here. And then this bottom lump is called the saccule. Now, the utricle and saccule, when the bony labyrinth is covering them, they're pretty hidden. You can't really see them, and that's why you don't see them in some of those models in the lab room. But if you remove that bony labyrinth, you'll see a lump on top and a lump on the bottom. So the utricle's on top, the saccule's on the bottom. Now what these do is they have like a jelly inside, and the jelly sloshes around, and the utricle and saccule are very good at picking up acceleration and deceleration. So when you accelerate like in a roller coaster, that jelly is going to slosh around in the utricle. Embedded in that jelly are stereocilial cells with the cilia sticking up. They're going to pick up that information and then send it to the brain. All right. Now, the semicircular canals, the utricle and saccule, have another branch of this vestibulocochlear nerve called the vestibular branch, because it's kind of going to the vestibule, that's going to pick up balance. So all of these balance sensations are going to zip down the vestibular branch and then to the vestibulocochlear nerve. And then to your brain, where you can interpret balance and hearing. All right. Now, I do know that the list has a muscle called the stapedius or something, and none of our diagrams have it, and none of our models in lab have it. So I don't even know why it's on the list, but there are muscles that attach to each of these ossicles that help control hearing and the vibrations. There's one on that is attached to the stapedius called, I can't even remember the name of the muscle. I always forget it because it's stupid. It's a stupid thing for the list, and hopefully it won't be on the test. I always give in class an example, a better example, because we've got a couple of diagrams that actually show a muscle that attaches to the malleus. This diagram, of course, doesn't have it, but there is a muscle that comes across and attaches to your malleus. It's called the tensor tympani. And this tensor tympani, if it contracts, it pulls on the malleus. And when it pulls on the malleus, it stops it from vibrating so much. This is going to help protect all of these vibrating structures from damage. So if you are in a really loud situation, let's say you go to a rock concert and you've got the speakers right there and they're really just blasting, your tensor tympani muscles and your stapedius muscles, they're going to pull on the bone and keep it from vibrating so much. So instead of vibrating like this, they're vibrating like this. And this is an autonomic smooth muscle, so it just happens. It's a reflex. And this is going to try and prevent hearing loss. This is also why when you leave that rock concert, you feel like you're deaf for about 30 minutes, because that muscle is pulling on the malleus and it's preventing it from vibrating properly. And that's going to last about 20-30 minutes until that muscle relaxes again, and then your hearing goes back to normal. But whenever you have that that kind of deaf feeling where you can't hear, it's because that malleus is being inhibited from vibrating. Over the course of time, that muscle or those sets of muscles relax and your vibrations go back to normal, and then your hearing is restored. Also, when you're exposed to really loud sounds, it can kind of traumatize all of your bones, and you get that ringing in your ear, tinnitus. You get that ringing in your ear because those bones are just vibrating crazy like, because that they were shocked by the loud sound. So a large boom, or someone fires a gun and you have that ringing in your ear, that's because of those bones continuing to vibrate even after the sound wave is gone. Okay, so I believe I covered everything on the list for the ear, and make sure you look over this with Dr. West's material, and you'll be ready to go on the test for the ear. All right, so I have one more video left for lab, and that's the eyeball. We'll record the eyeball, and then we are done with class. We are almost there. So hang in there, study your brain, study your ear. I'll post the eye video very soon, and then that's test 4. All right, I'll see you soon.